Nicole Lebrasseur, a dedicated legal researcher with over 15 years of experience, proudly serves as the founder and CEO of the Canadian People's Union NFP. Alongside her on the board of directors are Denis Lamothe, CFO, and Barb Garlow, a respected director and member of the Six Nations. Together, they stand united in their mission at the CPU, an organization unlike any other, representing informed Canadian citizens and Indigenous peoples from coast to coast. The CPU's goal is simple yet profound: to challenge the status quo and advocate for our collective civil and political rights reclamation, a legacy eroded by political oversight and global pressures. Today, we at the CPU seek to ignite a spark of change, progress, and a reimagined democracy. Our mission is to illuminate the role of citizens within our political system, expose the international principles Canada has neglected, and introduce a viable solution for reform. The core of our critique lies in the partocracy system, a 19th century political framework where power resides with parties over citizens. This system has failed to evolve with societal needs, overshadowing citizens' voices with party interests. Additionally, despite the passage into the 21st century, Canada's status as an undecolonized constitutional monarchy starkly contrasts with the principles of a true democracy, where citizens should be collective sovereigns and actively participate in decision-making processes. We propose a transformative shift towards true democracy, prioritizing the collective voice and ensuring adherence to national and international human rights laws, a sector alarmingly ignored by our current leaders. Canada must fulfill its commitments to the conventions, treaties, statutes, and the International Bill of Rights, including the Syracuse and Johannesburg Principles. These frameworks, demanding that restrictions on freedoms be lawful, necessary, proportionate, and non-discriminatory, are foundational yet overlooked in our domestic policies, leading to confusion, unnecessary spending, and detrimental health outcomes, to name a few. The disparity between our international promises and domestic practices calls for immediate action. As Canadians, we must bridge this gap for legal compliance and to uphold democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The CPU stands ready to lead this charge, advocating for Canada to become a global beacon of justice and human dignity. At this crossroads, we demand the opportunity to redefine governance to truly serve the people. The Powershift to Freedom project represents a crucial step towards embedding our collective rights firmly within our Constitution, shifting political power back to citizens and Indigenous peoples. This shift is not just a dream, it's a necessity, and we need your passion, voice, and commitment to democracy to make it happen. Your engagement is vital. Join us by endorsing the Convention of Consent, a living document that becomes legally binding with the support of 51% of citizens in 7 provinces. This convention is a step towards a brighter, more democratic future where past injustices are lessons learned, not repeated. Citizens 15 years old and over can sign at the cpu.ca. Together, we can usher in a new era of governance where corruption and unaccountability are relics of the past and our rights are protected and cherished. Let's make this vision a reality.
Okay, well, good morning. Happy Sunday to everybody. And we're back again. Hopefully, we'll be able to answer a few questions. We have a few questions I want to address now is how does this address the de facto government? Well, the de facto government that we have right now doesn't mean it's, it should be illegal, but it's not. It just says that We need to rise up. So our document, the Citizens Convention of Consent, addresses that fact as putting us in charge. It would remove King Charles and the power of the federal government in final decision-making authority in regards to the royal prerogative or whatever. Now everything's been handed down over to, since 1982, over to the Canadian federal government. The Parliament is the crown, and then you have the provincial, the provinces under them, and also the Senate. That encompasses the Senate, the Queen, well, the Governor General for the Queen. So as long as we have the Governor General here, it's kind of de facto, but doesn't really matter. We're still under colonialism, and that's the problem. We've never changed in 1982 from a colonial aspect. All we did was change dictatorship. Okay. So, and the irony of all that is that we didn't even change that at all either, because Canada still had two things to do, which was a referendum with the Indigenous nations within 3 years, and a referendum with the Canadian citizens within 15 years. So they had 15 years to finalize that constitution. And right now, what they're working with technically is a draft, because the original one still sits in the UK legislature, as long as the people together have not ratified it. So a lot of people think, well, Quebec didn't ratify it. Well, this doesn't really matter with whether Quebec does. It's got to be at least 7 provinces. So, and that was determined in court. So anyways, it's got to be, they have to have a referendum. They've never done it. They tried to have some, and this is what we're going to be covering today, because really the Indigenous nations, when Canada came about and confederated here, or even when England came and was handling a lot of the United States and here before Confederation and before the War of 1812, which gave us our boundaries. There's a long story there, but at the same time, the Indigenous nations, in regards to 1763, which is the Royal Proclamation that kind of determined that was kind of a confederation type of document that kind of confirms that Canada was partners with the Indigenous nations. Okay. And partnership means everything, because it also means partnership. The main first area of business that they had was a business partnership, as well as treaties of peace. So the trade was in relevance to business. So right now, they should be able to do their own business and not being taxed for it, because they never agreed to tax. So they were the first ones here. Everybody needs to recognize that. Yesterday, somebody said, well, anybody born here in Canada is technically an Indigenous person. Well, if you want to hammer it out that way, fine, but that's a cop-out, because it doesn't matter where your genes come from. It still comes from overseas. Okay? So whether you were born here or not, your DNA says it all. So anyways, long story short, we have the opportunity to legally take back our power, not take it back. We've never had it. But we were given the right in 1960 to collectively self-determine and decide what type of governance we wanted. And this is why the 1982 Constitution came about. And, but Canada only wanted to get the rights and freedoms recognized. They didn't want the whole Constitution. They wanted to get rid of the Constitution, only have a rights and freedoms, and then they were going to draft their own. That was Trudeau's ideas, and what they were kind of planning on. But what a lot of people don't know is you have to read the Hansards from the UK in regards to 1982, and then you'll know exactly what was determined. And even in the UK, it was determined that the 1763, in regards to Lord Denning and Lord Kerr, who actually heard the Indigenous nations speak in the UK, actually had, they're the ones who determined, yes, that document says it all, and it is a partnership within Canada. So when the Heritage Canada, which is a part of the Canadian government, decided to do a research on that in regards to 1982, well, 1993 actually, when Brian Mulroney was trying to have referendums to, the Charlottetown Accord, and both of them failed. So, anyways, both failed, but they still met with the prime minister, the premiers from all the provinces behind closed doors, which shouldn't have happened. And they went on with their business, and to hell with everything else, and we're just going to keep the status quo. Well, there should be no status quo. So when UNDRIP came out, United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, everybody started freaking out in Canada. What's the problem with Canada? Because Canadians don't know the history. A lot of Indigenous peoples are attacked for people who have no concept, who think that, oh my God, my ancestors came here, we farmed the land, and they worked hard for all this. And, if it would have been left up to them, we'd still, be stuck in the bush. And, but no, you can't think that way. And the idea here is that they were here first. Nobody can ever deny that. They had agreements, they had friendship treaties, and they had they were trading, and they were doing business. And they've never agreed to be under the Canadian government. They were partners, always recognized as partners, even though the French and the English, who tried to overtake them, never succeeded in being able to say, hey, no, you're our subject. They said, no, we're brothers, and we're equals. So that was maintained, and Heritage Canada admitted to that. And especially with the reconciliation and all this, well, now they were trying to say, well, Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada, what does it mean? Do we have to reopen the Constitution and add the Indigenous nations in the Constitution to guarantee their rights to self-determination within their own territories, and to have their own governments within their own territories? So the big debate was not about caring about the Indigenous peoples and what that meant. It was about maintaining the control over all of Canada, all of the natural resources, above the Indigenous nations and above Canadian citizens. Because if the nations push to open up, to restructure that Constitution, well, there's a few instances where the Canadian government, Trudeau, and everybody else, and even the cities, want to trash our Constitution and rewrite a new one. But that doesn't mean that we're going to have any power in there. They want to take more power away. That's why they want to change it, not because they want to fix it. We want to fix it. Okay. So, it's up to we the people to fix our de facto government. And it is de facto in the sense that we're supposed to have a democracy in Canada. The only ones that have a democracy is the colonial side of our governance, which is the parliamentarians. And they say, well, no, it's still a de jure government. They deal on a daily basis. And but the thing is as long as we have Charles or anybody, as the sovereign, as the head of state, it had, they'll say, oh, well, sovereignty doesn't mean anything. Well, we've had a comment that, oh, we're all sovereigns. If you want to talk about personal sovereignty, you need to talk to God. Okay. Sovereignty at the international level, okay, doesn't mean a person is sovereign. It means the state, the country is sovereign at the international level. Okay, so everything's been done really under corporate law, and that's how international law works. And it's the countries themselves as a whole. So the people as a whole, together, the collective, would be the sovereign, the head of states. Okay, so the head of state, and to be able to claim the sovereignty there, and to have the right to, our bank accounts, Canadian bank accounts, and Seoul, because it's corporation Seoul. So under the queen or the king, it's a corporation Seoul that the Canadian government gets to manipulate in regards to our bank accounts. So it's all a corporate. So it's a corporation under one title. So we'd have to become under one title, which would be a partnership with the Indigenous nations, both in partnership under the within that status of head of state. And then we would have to decide, who does what, and how their governance would be. And because right now we both the Canadian citizens and the Indigenous nations, we've been on the verge of losing everything for decades. And this has been a war against us since 1960, actually, I could say for sure, because they really didn't want to. At the time, Pierre Trudeau was in 1968, I've got a document from him where he recognizes the right to self-determination of Canadians and the Indigenous nations. Yet, he worked tooth and nail against it. Okay, so he was the Attorney General back then, Minister of Justice, and he was just a slime ball, hypocrite. But at the same time, he was trying to show he's been in with Klaus Schwab. I saw him in an interview in 1984 with Klaus Schwab. So they've been at this for a very long time with the WEF. It all started under the World Federalist movement. Okay, and then they changed names about 100 times, and they created more subcategories to keep everybody confused. But long story short, Mulroney was all involved. They were all involved in this. The Conservatives, it doesn't matter, who brought us the law to allow public health without being voted in to have rights here in Canada over us and at the international level. That was a total sabotage by the Conservative government. So anyways, long story short, we're going to move on because it's really important that we reestablish a real democracy in Canada, because we've been given those rights, but none of our countries actually gave us those rights. So again, double speak, right? It was all good intentions, but then they manipulated everything in the background. So we're here to solve that problem. And that's what the CPU has been researching for 15 years. Finally figured out in 2014 that we needed to sign, we had the right to sign an agreement amongst each other. Government doesn't need to be in there. We don't need to ask their permission, but we need to prove it in court that, yes, we've got 51% of the population or more that wants to do this. So, we need to step it up, because our parliamentarians, 338 people, could give it to us overnight. But they've been against us since the get-go. Ask Pierre Poilievre, will he hand over the reins to the people and put them in the Constitution? Okay? Put us as equal partners with the Indigenous nations in our Constitution the way it should be by international law and all rights, okay? And to follow all the rules so that we don't, say it's so that we're not told no, or that we don't get invaded or whatever, because a lot of things can happen. A lot of big corporations, a lot of people with money have investments in this country, and by law, all of the natural resources and everything comes back to all of us, okay, and the Indigenous nations. So we'd be able to claim all of our natural resources again. And there's nothing any other country, and countries are not allowed to punish us for it, because it is our right. Same as what you've heard. Everything you've heard, if you want to go back and listen to all of the presentations by all of the countries in regards to Palestine, they have those rights. We just need to make sure that Palestine doesn't get screwed over the way we all did, where the government takes all the power, because nowhere in international law does it says that we need a government, but nowhere does it say that the people can't rule over the government. Okay, and that would come with a veto power. Okay, we're not trying to take over our governance per se. It's just that we'd have the veto power and final decision-making authority when it comes to big issues, where, yes, we would have a referendum right across the country, and the politicians do their jobs, and then they become true public servants. but they do not want to. And this is what von Lyons was saying when this is a political a professor for in politics. Right now, I'm just kind of lost there. But anyways, von Lyons was teaching at Trent University and created this book, he titled it "The Powershift," and that's an informed citizenry and politicians that will really want to work for the people. So he went to the politicians and said, hey, do you want to give, we can do this for the people, and this would be right, this would be true democracy. So the thing is none of them wanted it. He was pissed off, and to say the least, because they do not want to be beneath the people. They all have ego issues. Okay, the ego issues is what's going, and the wanting to control and the power, is what burns at them and what fires them to, go into politics. And then that would be ruined, right, if they were just employees. So we need to find people without ego and who really truly love this country and its people and our cultures before we lose those cultures. Because right now, we need to teach the migrants who have come in here the history behind the Indigenous nations and Canadian citizens, because in some of the provinces, East Indian people have taken over, and others, stores and whatnot. And I remember seeing a sign, and this was in the news quite a few years back, where it says, no Indians, no Native people allowed. Not sure if it was Manitoba or Saskatchewan. Okay. So when East Indian people come here and then say no, it's the same thing as what the nations, the settlers did to the Indigenous nations way back. We're way beyond that. There's no reason for that to ever happen again. But we need to make sure that everybody understands the rights of the Indigenous peoples, and that, yes, they have more rights than the settlers do. And you need to suck it up. Okay? But the thing is in regards to rights at the United Nations, like what all of the countries decided to do, and to, and a lot of Indigenous nations in other countries, get a lot less than here in Canada. So it's hard to say, well, okay, our Indigenous peoples are being really mistreated. Well, yes, they are. And that's a known fact. Some still don't have clean water. They don't have what's due to them. They've been ostracized. They've been, ridiculed. They're only being used by the Canadian government for a showpiece, cultural showpiece, and look at how good we are to our Indigenous nations. If our Canadian governments had been decent to the Indigenous nations, they would have been partners in the Constitution. And that's what we need to bring out. Because if we don't create this partnership and mutual respect on both sides, they have to respect the other side as much as we need to respect them. That goes both ways. And now is the time in history that we can do this with an informed citizenry, informed citizens in Canada, both holding Indigenous culture in respect, because we are on Indigenous lands, whether you want to digest that or not. That's your problem. But the reality is that they've been recognized. They should be. They were the first confederation in Canada, not all the provinces. It was with the Crown and the Indigenous nations. So I'm going to show you. I've posted it in our group, the CPU, and I'm just going to change this here and go share screen. Yeah. Okay. Confederation partners. That's not it. Okay. Now we're going to share this. Okay, so I'm going to go to here. I hope you can see that. So this is the book that was created, Partners in Confederation. I'm just going to make sure that you guys can see this. Oh, where am I here? Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to get myself out of the picture here. Might not be able to hear me if I do that. Okay, so I'm just going to go back. Partners, I'm just going to bring this up a little. Is that too big? Oh, no, it should be all right. Okay. Now, back again. Okay, so Aboriginal peoples, self-government, and the Constitution. So this was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. They did a great job here, I have to admit. Okay, and because, and yeah, and this was handed out September 24th, 1993. And it was also placed in the Canada Gazette. Okay, so the government can't say that it doesn't know. So Aboriginal peoples, self-government, and the Constitution. And that includes First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Okay, so they say it here. So it's a really interesting read. And it tells a lot. Okay, so here within it, they cover the original status of Aboriginal peoples, early relations between Indigenous Americans and Europeans, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, the doctrine of Aboriginal rights, the process of constitution building, and a constitutional watershed, the Constitution Act of 1982, self-government as a constitutional right, the charter, the character of Aboriginal governmental rights, implementing self-government, group initiatives, treaties, and agreements, and federal action. And then they have their conclusion and their notes. But I've highlighted actually a lot of the stuff. But actually, it was in February 1992, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples issued a commentary entitled The Right of Aboriginal Self-Government and the Constitution. So the aim of that commentary was to discuss the then current proposals for constitutional reform as those bore upon the right of Aboriginal peoples to govern themselves. In the commentary, we set out a number of criteria to be satisfied by any constitutional provision dealing with the Aboriginal right to self-government. We also reviewed a variety of ways to accommodate that right explicitly in the Constitution. So, they really tried to work at it and to see how they can work this into the Constitution. But really, the Canadian government did not want it. Okay. So here it says Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 guarantees the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. So in order not to open up the Constitution, they added this in 1982. So anyways, they were trying to say, well, yeah, but we also need to add that within the they have treaty and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, but they didn't write that they had the right to self-government. And they were trying to explain. So as the paper explains, there are persuasive grounds for believing that this provision includes an inherent right of self-government. But they wanted this included in the Constitution itself to be added to this clause here, okay? Or another aspect of it. Now, this view was significant and has significant implications for Aboriginal peoples, for federal and provincial governments, and for the public at large. It therefore merits wide public discussion. Okay, so now it says, like, in considering the Aboriginal right of self-government in the Canadian Constitution, commissioners do not mean to suggest that the Constitution is the only source of this right, or that the judicial route is the preferred way to articulate it. Other possible sources for the right exists, such as international law, natural law, treaties, and the laws, constitution, and other laws in other countries, constitutions, and spiritual beliefs of Aboriginal peoples. And other methods of articulating the right are available. So they're saying, well, it would be common knowledge, so we really don't need to write it. So these topics deserve consideration in their own right. Our aim in this paper, however, is simply to help fill the vacuum left by the failure of the constitutional reform process and to rekindle discussion of the potential for Aboriginal self-government in the existing constitution. Okay. So they're trying to say, well, we don't need to reopen the constitution. We can just do this. Or it's just assumed, right? And that would be a real hardship for them because, and this is what I want to explain to you, is that okay? What I'm trying to explain to you is that if they open up our constitution, they don't want to do that. Well, who do they have to ask? Because 1982, our constitution is still sitting in the legislature of the UK. If they'd reopen that, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to reopen that, the UK would have to approve it. Because our constitution, as long as it's in the legislature of the UK to this day, it is still in the hands of the UK, not the Canadian government or the provinces. Okay. So that would pose a problem. Would they try to lie about it and say, oh, we don't need the UK, we could just go ahead and say that they can do this? Well, no, they can't. Okay. They'd still have to come back to the UK, and the UK is going to say, well, you guys had 15 years, you did nothing. And it's the Constitution has been up for repeal since 1982 in the UK, but can't be repealed because it's still technically in effect. Even though the Canadian government does things on their own, where the country itself is independent, but we have not had our constitution handed over to the people, because as long as Charles is the head of state and not the people in Canada or somebody we choose, but why would we want another head of state when we are the heads of state, the collective heads of state, with the Indigenous peoples on their side? So you got two heads of state in a partnership under a corporation soul. Okay? Do you get that? And this would totally change everything in Canada, because instead of paying taxation, we can all work together to make sure that we end up with dividends instead of all of the monies flowing to offshore accounts to big corporations who have taken who bought our natural resources for their own wealth. And who's losing all this money? The Indigenous nations and us. You know, we have to pay for infrastructure, for roads, for all of their corporations to be able to, you know, sell us goods or whatnot. And so we pay for them to be able to sell to us. How many are you fed up? Are you fed up of being a slave and a subject of the Canadian government? You decide. If you're fed up, then I suggest you go and sign your convention of consent. It's free. And then join the CPU, because we need the support of the people behind us more in a bigger amount than what the the Liberal Party has in memberships and the Conservative parties have in membership. We need those people, as many, to even surpass that, for anyone to believe that Canadians want to be in charge of our country. Because all we have the right to do right now is for us to vote in for our next dictator. Pierre Poilievre right now would be able to, all the promises he makes, he would be able to write up a petition and petition the government on the e-petition website, because we need, an MP. So why is he not starting that now? Him saying, oh, I will do this if I'm elected. I will do this if I'm elected. What's holding you back, Pierre? Seriously. You've got access to the petition website. Start writing petitions, and so that the people can have to be able to sign them, like we're having a mini referendum. You really want to have a no confidence vote by the people? Draft an e-petition with your name on it. The Conservatives. Sign your Citizens Convention of Consent. You really want the people in power? You say you work for the people, put them in power. So, hey, I don't want to be, the bearer of bad news here, Mr. Poiliev, but put your money where your mouth is. Show the people that you're for real, or are you just another hypocrite like we've seen throughout, the conservative leaderships? The conservatives brought us the public health shenanigans that we've suffered through the last 4 years. And that was brought, again, I'll say it again, conservatives. I've never seen the conservatives and the liberals not work together. When they say they don't work together, as far as I'm concerned, my opinion here, you're all hypocrites. And I have no problems in saying it. And then we've got, a minister of justice who thinks he can create laws against our human rights and try to control the internet, where our rights are also protected on the internet. Can none of yous read? Hello? So here we are trying to fight for Indigenous rights, Canadian people's rights, all of our rights to protect our countries, because they're bringing in people who do not understand, the Indigenous side of things. And when people come to this country, whether they are migrants or immigrants, you come to Canada, you need to learn about Canada. You need to learn the languages in Canada. If we're to have 3 languages, shouldn't that be our own Indigenous people's language instead of Arabic? Now that we see in our doctors' offices, Arabic? Seriously? If these people are coming to this country because they're looking for a better life, they need to forget the other one and focus on this one and learn everything about it. And that's a huge problem. They need to learn about the consequences of breaking into homes. You can't just go and do what you want here. Some countries, they get away with it. And now, what do our police say in Ontario? Oh, please leave your car keys outside your door so they don't come and break in. This is what they brought us. This, no matter whether it's a Canadian doing it, or a migrant, or an immigrant, or an Indigenous person, or it doesn't matter who. This is the state that our country is in right now at the hands of our governments. Why? Because you just pretend to ask people. Doing a survey of 1,000 people or 2,000 people when we're almost 40 million people is a crock. I almost said it. Is a crock. Okay? It's BS. Because you don't have the real decisions of the people unless you have a referendum. And then the referendum can't be manipulated the way you guys have been manipulating it. I hope the hell you're all listening. Because enough is enough. So here I'm talking to our politicians, okay? Wake the hell up. But everybody from the the mayors, the councillors, all need to understand Indigenous rights. Because Indigenous rights don't just stop at their reserves. They flow right across Canada. And you'll see it admitted in this document. They flow. So, whether you like it or not, that's what it is. And that's how it should be. They have a right. And it doesn't stop at their door. It's everywhere across Canada. And it's actually everywhere across North America, which is another thing people don't understand. They are North American. They are not Canadian or U.S. citizens. Those are just added on to what they are. They are North American, Canadian, and U.S. citizens. Citizens in Canada, okay, they have the right to do everything that we do, plus their rights on their territories. Okay. So do people need to be afraid of UNDRIP? Hell no. It's always been recognized that a lot of lands were not negotiated yet. Yet the Canadian government tried to subvert everything, even through UNDRIP, because we need to look at what UNDRIP covers and what the Canadian government did not add in UNDRIP. Because they did the same thing in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, people. They only gave us the rights they wanted to give us, not the ones they signed on to, which are automatically added to our Constitution. Okay. Automatically. Everything the Canadian government signed in regards to our rights, even if they haven't made a law for it, it's tough luck. They had so much time to do it in, but not past 40 years. And the rights that are our Bill of Rights that includes our human rights, our civil and political rights, and our civil and political and cultural rights. These things are embedded, okay, as a Bill of Rights, International Bill of Rights, and those are automatic in our Constitution. Automatic. They are self-executing because, and this is what the lawyers and the judges in Canada need to get their heads around, and everybody who works under human rights in Canada need to work around. Every employer, every business, all of our institutions need to understand these rights and how far they go, not just the charter. Because while they're just debating the charter, they're not discussing these other rights. Court cases would have been totally different. Some would never have won their court cases and get away with what they did when they've disrespected human rights. Supreme Court judges wouldn't be able to be how can I say, coerced, corrupt. Our Supreme Court judges understand international law. But as long as the people don't, any judge across Canada can manipulate us. The lawyers can manipulate us. The lawyers get manipulated because they don't know international law either. And what does the word dominion mean? The Dominion of Canada. Domination. You have dominion, domination over a territory. So, let's get back to this thing. But it's really important that you understand that the Indigenous peoples, we need to fight for their rights as much as we need to fight for ours. Because none of us will be able to have any rights. Allison, people are saying, oh, we shouldn't have no borders. I disagree. People who say, oh, we shouldn't have any borders, why don't you go and join the WEF, please? Because that's exactly what that means. The Indigenous peoples don't have borders across Canada, the United States to Mexico. They don't have borders there, okay? But if we did not have borders, imagine the mess. I would rather do myself away than call myself an American citizen. I like being Canadian. Okay. I liked what Canadian values portrayed, although that was an illusion in regards to our government. But why don't we make our dreams come true and make this country a reality that, yes, people help each other, people work together, people prosper together, help each other out. We don't go and piss on our Indigenous peoples like some do. Not everybody does that. No, not everybody agrees with that. Anybody who is prejudiced needs to give their head a shake. Because would you want in business, I just need to ask this question. If you're in business or you make a deal with somebody and they screw you over, aren't you going to be pissed off? Do you want this to happen to you? Put yourself in their shoes. Just for 5 seconds. Put yourself in their shoes. Okay. So, the reality is that we have decisions to make. What we make of this country will depend on every single Canadian citizen and Indigenous person. So when we're talking about the UN, there's different places where the WEF has infiltrated the UN, as well as the elite, and in over 100 countries, in parliaments of over 100 countries. This is a real problem. And that's what we're being faced with today. So we either do what's right or we might as well fold. Okay? So if we want to be able to protect our children and their future, we need to protect everybody. And that includes the Indigenous peoples. And that also includes the people that we have here that our governments had brought in who we have no room for. That our government is allowing to be in tents and suffering. So we have a big job to do because we have responsibility. And, when you have a responsibility, that goes a long way. So coming back to the UN, not all of the UN is bad. I used to think that. Not anymore, because some people are really trying. But the ones who manipulate will take what's good and then turn it into sour milk for everybody else. So if we were to walk away from the UN right now, you have no more rights. You destroy the UN today, you kiss all of your rights goodbye. Is that what you want? Because the only true rights we have are the ones that countries are fighting for at the international level right now for Palestine. And if you turn around and say, we want out of the UN, then you're shitting on Palestine. Excuse my language. You're pooping on Palestine. Beep, beep, beep. Okay? And their rights. Or even the rights of the Israeli people to have their own little country there beside Palestine. Okay? Everybody, there's a solution for everyone. There's a solution for every problem. But right now, we need an educated people in Canada. And to say you want out of the UN is, you might as well hang all Canadians together and the Indigenous nations and the rest of this world. Because that's exactly what they want you to say. They want you so pissed off that you destroy the little rights that you don't even know you have. It's time that you knew about your rights and what Canada and the UK have signed on to, because that makes them liable and that helps us legally to fight them. But without the UN and, those rights that we have, the World Health Organization, now get this out of your system, the World Health Organization, no matter what the hell they sign, cannot override our fundamental rights. They cannot derogate from them. So if you understood the law and you understood your fundamental freedoms and our International Bill of Rights, you'd understand that even the WHO says it can't override our my body, my choice rights. So now everybody's running in fear and going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. You have no reason to be in fear. If you've got the knowledge, there is no fear. You can stand up on your own two legs and say, yeah, well, I'm aware of this. Here's the proof. Here's the document. Now, if you're a lawyer, you're a judge, you better get the hell back in school. And don't rely on Canadian schools. You better go at the international level. You better go to another country if you want to truly learn about international law, because here they lied. Canada tried to create its own laws by using the judges and the lawyers to subvert the rule of law. Everything that I've read so far, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm practicing my civil and political rights with everybody that I can. Canadian citizens and even people at the international level, because we all have those same rights together. And that's what you need to understand. So if we know our rights, they can't fool us. give you an example. Toronto, the people understood their rights in regards to the green belt. They weren't supposed to build houses there. The people didn't want houses built there. But the Doug Ford, I'm going to do what I want. Huh? Did he do what he wanted? The people knew their rights. So if you know your rights in your municipality, you can tell them all to shove those 15-minute cities. They want to do 15-minute neighborhoods, go right ahead. But don't come and charge people for moving around, or don't block sections because, you're trying to stop congestion and you're going to charge the people more taxes to get by. They can't do this to us, but you need to stand up and say it. And then you need to say it with the right laws, the right legal information. Saying, I'm a sovereign citizen. Yeah, right. Go and tell that to somebody else. Okay, talk to God. We're only sovereign together. Okay? We're only sovereign together. As a collective, as the official head of state, because we have the right to our self-determination that was not given to us in 1960. They've talked about it lately, all about the rights of the Palestinians to their right to self-determination. They've been fighting for it since 1967, and Israel was brought in there to control them and to steal the natural resources and to wipe them out. Yet the people of Israel had no clue what was coming down, or that was the real intention. So both peoples, Palestinians and Israelis, are being used by infiltrated governments that are using them. Same with here. The woke, the trans, all being used. All being used for what? Transhumanist agendas. Forcing a huge group of people that have been doing things for eons to change for a little group of people. No, you give that group of people their rights and you leave the rest alone. Otherwise, you ferment hate. But now we're going to do hate speech. According to who? If you read the Syracuse Principles and you read the Johannesburg Principles, hate speech is not... what is hate speech? Hate speech. What have court precedents said? You can't just go and invent, Mr. Arif Virani, what you want. You can't. Just because you're Minister of Justice and Attorney General doesn't mean you get to be the little king there and decide what's the law. Okay? There's a rule of law to be followed internationally, and we need to all abide by it. Okay. So if we come back to this here, and I'm just going to get to the page directly. We're talking about the rights of Aboriginal peoples, and it's important that these rights be met because that helps everybody. And if the Indigenous nations don't want to lose everything, this document is important to them. So here it says, the adoption of this section marked a watershed in relations between Aboriginal peoples and the Canadian state. As the Supreme Court of Canada noted in the Sparrow case, decided in 1990. Well, I'll tell you where that came from. Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 represents the culmination of a long and difficult struggle in both the political forum and the courts for the constitutional recognition of Aboriginal rights. The strong representations of Native associations and other groups concerned with the welfare of Canada's Aboriginal peoples made the adoption of Section 35 possible. Now, the Supreme Court observed that the new provision provided a strong constitutional foundation for negotiations between Aboriginal peoples and Canadian governments. But this section also afforded Aboriginal peoples protection against certain kinds of legislation. Okay? The certain kinds of legislation is they can't draft legislation in regards to us and then include them in it that is totally different. So it's like when they've got fishing and hunting rights and all of these other rights. So you have to take those into consideration, and you can't stop them from hunting and fishing. Um, so a lot of Canadians say, well, I can only go fishing or hunting these certain times or these certain places, and these people can go anywhere they want. Well, that's their prerogative. That's their right. So our Canadian government kind of controls ours so that the fisheries, the lakes, and everything, still maintain a good supply. And yet, but they cannot stop the Aboriginal peoples from doing that, or even selling fish or moose or whatever. They had the right to their own sustenance, and they have the right to be able to trade or to charge whatever amounts they want for what they sell. And that needs to be fixed. So here in the context of 1982 is sure enough to tell us that this is not just a codification of the case law on Aboriginal rights that had accumulated by 1982. Section 35 calls for a just settlement for Aboriginal peoples. It renounces the old rules of the game under which the Crown established courts of law and denied those courts the authority to question sovereign claims made by the Crown. So the Crown was never on top of the Indigenous nations. It owes the Indigenous nations fiduciary duty. What does that fiduciary duty means? It means that in order to be able to bring settlers here and to also negotiate natural resources and whatnot, those were the protections of the Crown and against us, from invading their territories or whatever. That was all guaranteed to them, but the governments tried to never keep it up. So the relations, the court's view, the relationship between government and Aboriginal is trust-like, rather than adversarial, and contemporary recognition and affirmation of Aboriginal rights must be defined in light of this historic relationship. So in Canada, the government figures it does not owe us fiduciary duty because we place them in power, but they do owe us fiduciary duty. And they owe us fiduciary duty in regards to our human rights. Okay. And that goes all the way down to the municipalities. Even band councils owe fiduciary duty to their people. And for us, councillors, City Hall, the mayors, this thing about the stronger mayors thing, that should be contested in court and actually considered illegal, because you're not allowed to ignore, if you've got 25 councillors and you only need 3 to 4 and the mayor to vote for something, and you don't even call the other ones in, you just committed an act against all of the constituents. And that should be brought up, because that should not be allowed. Ontario, and this all comes back down to one world government, where all the cities are being asked to become international cities, and then everything's going to be a cookie cutter right across the world. Every city is going to be the same, and then they're going to control us within those cities. Okay, so I always call them jails, city jails, without bars. No, how they're going to put cameras everywhere. So why are they bringing in so many migrants and everything else and putting them in a depressed state where they might commit a crime, or they don't verify who they are before allowing them into the country and placing people at risk? I mean, our own people place us at risk, but it doesn't matter who we're bringing in. And the situation of people not having enough money to survive and all this is putting everybody in a bad situation at the cost of our Canadian government's stupidity. So how many times are we going to encourage stupid by voting for them? We still have to kind of vote for them because we still need a parliament. We still need to get them in there, but they don't need to have final decision-making authority. And that's where, things need to be incorporated. So the Aboriginal right of self-government had an existing basis in Canadian law. For example, a representative of the Canadian Indian Lawyers Association, Ms. Judy Sayers, invoked the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and the Constitution Act of 1982, and concluded with this statement: there is a law and history, a definite base in law and history, a definite basis for self-determination and self-government. So they were still trying to make that argument. Noting this possibility, the Penner Committee went on to recommend that the Constitution be amended explicitly to recognize and entrench the right of self-government. Indian governments would then, in the committee's view, clearly form a distinct order of government in Canada with their jurisdiction defined. Over the following decade, the goal of further constitutional reform was actively pursued. Several intensive rounds of constitutional negotiations took place between Aboriginal peoples and the federal and provincial governments. One major aim was to secure explicit constitutional recognition of the right of self-government. These efforts culminated in the detailed Aboriginal amendments proposed in the Charlottetown Accord in 1982. Despite the complexity of these provisions, one single clause lay at their core. It stated that the Aboriginal peoples of Canada had the inherent right of self-government within Canada. The demise of the Charlottetown Accord in the fall of 1982 left in its wake a host of unsettled questions, notwithstanding the unanimity reached during negotiations. The current prospects for constitutional amendments in this area are not favorable. The route of constitutional reform, which seemed promising in the early 1980s, now appears to be blocked temporarily. Not blocked temporarily, they want to never see them appear. So we can change that. We can enforce that, but we can enforce that change the proper way. Canadian citizens have to say, hey, yes, we're ready to be able to come into an equal partnership in our Constitution as we the people and the Indigenous nations as the collective head of state. And with veto power over governments when we have issues. And then the Indigenous nations should be able to have their own side also within our governance. There's things that can be done that could work wonders for everybody if we just sat down and thought about how we can all make this work. Because like I said, we either lose it all or we fix it. Decision is yours. So in considering these questions, it is hopeful to recall exactly what the Charlottetown Accord proposed to do, and more important, what it did not propose to do. The draft legal text of October 9th, 1982 included the following provision: the Aboriginal peoples of Canada have the inherent right of self-government within Canada. So this is what they were going to add. So as the wording indicates, this provision did not claim to create a right of self-government or to grant it to Aboriginal peoples. It affirms simply that Aboriginal peoples have this right, a right described as inherent. Thus, the draft provision assumed that the right of self-government already existed in some sense. The provision was intended merely to confirm the existence of the right and give explicit constitutional status. So what the governments have done is say, well, we really don't need to write it in the Constitution. Well, no, because then they'll be embarrassed because it has to go back to the UK. And then they get found out that, I thought we did this in 1982. Well, no, well, the people have not spoken. Did you really want this Constitution? Do you want to change things within the Constitution? Right now, the Constitution would be fine if we were placed as the head of state with veto power over our government. And then we can change things as we go. But we don't need to hold off everything in order to change that document. We just need to accept it the way, get our names in there. And not our names, but our, Canadian citizens and Indigenous peoples are the equal shareholders, co-owners of the Crown of Canada. In that sense, of the Constitution. So we're not equal shareholders in the form of lands and territories, but in as far as political rights, we each have an equal partnership in the political rights. So there's a lot more to be explained there, but at the same time, it's really important that people understand that, a lot of their territories have not been decided upon. Um, they were cut off in many places. So let's try to make, the best out of everything, and really figure out a way where everybody can be happy, and because it can happen. So was the accord correct in recognizing that the right of self-government already existed in Canadian law? This question is the subject of this paper. In concentrating on Canadian law, we do not mean to rule out other sources for the right of self-government, such as international law, natural law, treaties, or the laws, constitutions, and spiritual beliefs, in particular, Aboriginal groups. Such sources provide complementary routes to the goal of self government and a richer and fuller understanding of the right. We hope to explore some of these sources on other occasions. In this paper, however, we focus on the right of self government in Canadian law in the belief that this subject provides a good point of departure for the more wide ranging discussions that need to be pursued. Now, the problem with this line is that if you only focus on Canadian law, you will get nowhere, zero, zilch almost. Okay. Uh, I mean, you can get somewhere, but if it wasn't for Justice, for Lord Denning in the UK, and if it wasn't for the United Nations Indigenous human rights and things changing in other countries worldwide, Canada kind of sits there with its hands on its ears and tries to discourage the fact that Indigenous peoples have more than just self governance on their territories. Okay. So here it says in the first chapter, we consider the original status of Aboriginal um, peoples, reviewing their early relations with upcoming Europeans. So this document is really good for everybody to kind of read because um, it gives you a knowledge of what's going on, and it kind of helps put everything into perspective. So it would be very important for all of the lawyers across Canada, all of the justices across Canada, all of the municipal mayors and councillors to read this. And then they'll see that, yes, when they're creating laws within a municipality, they have to incorporate Indigenous rights. And they also have to incorporate our everybody's International Bill of Human Rights. So they can't do what they got away with during the last 4 years. We need to stop it now. We need to educate them as much as we can. We need to get educated as much as we can and then pass that on, but especially to those in administration. Because if they're creating laws and they don't know, it's like um, our little minister of justice there that replaced David Lametti. And even David Lametti didn't know crap either because they don't consider international law. And that's what they've been told, that they've been lied to. So we've been lied to, and things would take a whole other perspective because those rights were already embedded in our Constitution. But Canada always made sure to be dirty handed and to be able to, and to push things around, or use double speak to confuse everybody, and then to try and create their own laws that are totally out of whack with the rule of law. So we need to reinstate the rule of law. We need to see what words have no business. We have one word that's inserted 2,000 times in Canadian law everywhere, from federal to provincial and to municipal. And that word only helps contribute to corruption. There are many words like that. We have somebody he's working on his new book, and he's got new words now that he's found as well. And he gave us all of his research, which was terrific. So we haven't used that yet and haven't showed anybody yet, but it's all out there. And, if you really do the research and you look at the laws, well, these laws should be, taken off because under the rule of law, it's supposed to be specific and not ambiguous. And they use all kinds of words to be ambiguous. So, when we're talking about now this, I thought maybe this new Minister of Justice won't let, Justin Trudeau, hopefully this guy won't be a yes man. okay, and do whatever he's told, without checking things out properly and then sticking to his morals, before doing anything corrupted. But no, we're stuck with the same crap we've always had, except for Jody Raybould, who stood up and really described the meaning of her job, understood the meaning of her job. As long as we don't have somebody like her who understands it, or that we don't reiterate to Mr. Arif, Marani, sorry. Arif, I keep forgetting this. Virani. Okay, I can say it in French, but Virani. So, anyways, he needs to really, if he's going to do a good job, he needs to pick up some clues from Jody Raybould, okay? And he needs to work for the Canadian citizens. And as Jody said, she's trying to protect the Prime Minister from being an asshole. Excuse my language. But it came back on him. And then she's the one that got punished for it. And, and that's the story of Canada. When the justices should have withheld our human rights instead of derogating from it and saying, well, we're not the expert, only public health is the expert. Well, public health is not experts on human rights or the law. What the hell are they doing? So if you truly believe that, again, help us by signing your Citizens Convention of Consent. Let's get this mess cleaned up that our governments have done. If Mr. Poilievre wants to be the savior of Canadian peoples, well, he needs to put his money where his mouth is. He needs to come up with his petitions. He needs to make some changes now, not after he's elected. Because that's, again, all BS. That's the BS line they feed us all the time when they could actually do something now about it. Go and get your Canadian citizen, the Canadian citizens' support through your e-petitions. Get it done that way. At least start somewhere. So it's just to say that the Indigenous nations in Canada, there's enough proof that, yes, they should have been in part of our Confederation. They should actually, so it would be federal, provincial, Indigenous justice system. Okay. So in Canada, we have the Parliament. The justice system is supposed to be, the judiciary is supposed to be separate from the government. The provinces administer the people. So that neither can, though the reason why the justice system is separate is so that the governments can't take advantage of us or don't do things they're not supposed to. And it's the justice system that is supposed to be, the justices and the lawyers are supposed to be the caretakers of the rule of law, the protectors of law and of our rights. So that there's a really big disconnect. And we need to just bring that back. So I will leave you with this. And, hopefully you'll get to understand where all of this is coming from. But if you want to see change, finally we'll be able to put the Indigenous nations where they're supposed to be. They'd be happy. We'd be happy. At least some of them. But what happens is a lot of people don't understand. Even some of the Indigenous peoples don't even know their rights. So as far as Canadians and Indigenous peoples go, we have a long way to work towards this. But we can start now. But it doesn't mean that we can't change our governance and change that system and enforce the fact that our government needs to give us our rights. And we need to be able to take them. So the international law gives us that right. And we need to support the Palestinian in getting their own country, as well as Israelis, because they're going to end up killing each other. And that needs to stop. Nobody should be going through what they're going through. And we don't need to be going through that here either. And everybody needs to respect everybody else. Doesn't matter what religion you are, what color you are. We're all human beings. We need to respect each other, you know. And but it goes both ways. You want respect, you need to show respect. Okay. So, anyways, I'm going to leave you with that. And for our members, you'll be able to find the documents in our community under Indigenous Rights in Canada on the left-hand side of the community. So I will be posting them in both French and English. But it's a good read. And yes, so you can't wonder why the Canadian government has taken so long, but it's because they're trying to get the Indigenous nations to sign away all their rights in these new treaties, which are BS, because really, the Indigenous nations, no matter what treaty they sign now, those rights are there. Okay. So they're not just Indigenous on their territory, they are throughout Canada and including the United States. But for now, for us, a Native person, even though they're not part of a reserve, they're on their reserve, they still have those rights. Doesn't mean that they have to be within a certain group. So we need to show them respect, and we need to make sure that they're protected legally, and it's not by, oh well, it's assumed anyway. No, that's BS. Let's get them in our constitution the way they're supposed to be. Equal partners with Canadian citizens as the official collective head of state of Canada. We do, as long as we have Charles there, we are still under colonialism. We are still under imperialism, and stuck to where we are just, how can I say, subjects and not the people in power. So please, do what you have to, but get yourself to the cpu.ca, sign your convention, get everybody to sign them. And for those people who are asking about our door hangers, we don't hand them out to just anybody. You have to be a member. We do the door hangers so that our members can get them to be able to bring to their community, and to hand them out so that they can connect with their community and start changing things at the city hall level, and making sure that the councillors know their rights. And because what can happen is, once the more the international rights are recognized for Palestine, and the more the international law rights are being pushed, then the more that we can use them in courts here. So our how can I say, the people who work in our governance, or even city hall, municipalities, you can all get sued. So please, if you don't want to get sued, stop interfering over our international human rights and all the rights that we have. When you're creating a law, take those into consideration and stop trampling all over people because you think you know best, because you do not. And especially if you're Canadian, you sure as hell don't, because we've been misled. Okay. So you're just as bad as what we were until we started getting educated. So suck it up, get educated, and do right by your constituents, do right by your people. If you have a heart, you'll understand where I'm coming from. So thank you, and we'll talk to you soon. I'm just going to leave you with a little something. But the bottom line is that, yeah, we have rights, and they're not being recognized, and they need to get recognized. Okay. Bye-bye.